The desert wind carried sand across the rocky outcrop, where Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen lay perfectly still. His weathered face showed years of combat experience, but his eyes held doubt as he watched the young soldier beside him through his binoculars. Private Jake Morrison, barely 22 years old, had been assigned to their sniper team just 3 weeks ago. Fresh out of sniper school with perfect test scores, but zero real combat experience. "Target is at 3,700 meters, Chen whispered into his radio, wind speed varying between 8 and 12 knots, direction shifting northeast to east, temperature dropping as the sun goes down. The voice of Captain Rodriguez crackled through their earpieces. "Negative on the shot, Falcon 1. Distance is too extreme. Wait for the target to move closer." Morrison adjusted his scope slightly. His breathing controlled and steady. The Barrett M82 rifle felt natural in his hands, despite the other soldiers' doubts about his abilities. He had been listening to whispered conversations for weeks now. The veterans questioned why command had sent such a young, inexperienced sniper to their elite unit. "Sir, I have a clear shot," Morrison said quietly into his radio. Chen shook his head. "Kid, that's nearly 2.5 miles. Even with perfect conditions, that shot is almost impossible. The bullet will be in the air for over 4 seconds. Wind, temperature, even the Earth's rotation affects accuracy at that distance." Morrison had heard these lectures before. Every member of their 12-man unit had made it clear they thought he was too green for this mission. Sergeant Williams had been particularly vocal about it during their briefing that morning. "Look, rookie," Williams had said, pointing at the satellite photos spread across the wooden table in their temporary base. "This isn't some training exercise back home. One missed shot out here, and we all pay the price. The target we're hunting has killed over 200 civilians in terrorist attacks. If he gets away because you choke under pressure, those deaths are on your head." Morrison remembered nodding silently, understanding their concerns but also knowing something they didn't. His grandfather had been a sniper in Vietnam, and his father had served as a Marine marksman in Iraq. Shooting was literally in his blood, but more than that, he had a natural ability that even his instructors at sniper school had called extraordinary. The target they were tracking was Ahmed Hassan, a high-value terrorist leader who had been moving through this region for weeks. Intelligence reported he would be meeting with local militia leaders at an old compound built into the mountainside. The compound sat on a ridge that made approach impossible without being detected. Long-range elimination was their only option. Chen studied the target through his spotting scope. Hassan stood on a balcony of the compound, gesturing animatedly while speaking to 3 other men. He was tall and thin, wearing traditional robes that fluttered in the desert wind. The man had evaded capture for over 2 years, always staying one step ahead of coalition forces. "Falcon 1, this is command," Captain Rodriguez's voice came through again. "We're getting reports that Hassan might be moving to a different location tonight. This could be our only chance." Morrison felt the familiar calm that came over him when he was behind a rifle. His heart rate actually slowed down rather than speeding up. Time seemed to stretch out, allowing him to process every detail of the shot. He calculated wind speed, humidity, barometric pressure, and the angle of decline to the target. The numbers flowed through his mind like a mathematical equation. "Chen, what's the exact range?" Morrison asked. Chen checked his laser rangefinder again. 3,697 meters. Wind is gusting now, probably up to 15 knots. The other team members were spread out across the ridge, providing security and overwatch. Morrison could hear their quiet conversations through his earpiece. None of them thought this shot was possible. Sergeant Davis had even suggested they call for air support instead. Air support would take 40 minutes minimum, Morrison had argued during planning. Hassan could be gone by then. Now, as evening shadows grew longer, Morrison knew their window was closing fast. Hassan had survived this long because he never stayed in one place for more than a few hours. Their intelligence suggested he would leave the compound after dark, disappearing into a network of caves that would make tracking him nearly impossible. Morrison adjusted his position slightly, settling deeper into his hide. He had constructed the concealed position that morning using local rocks and desert vegetation. From just 50 meters away, the hide was virtually invisible. His rifle barrel extended through a carefully constructed opening that cast no shadows and revealed no movement. "Morrison, you sure about this?" Chen asked, genuine concern in his voice. "I've been doing this for 8 years, and I wouldn't attempt that shot." Morrison nodded slowly. "I'm sure." The truth was, Morrison had been making shots at extreme distances since he was 12 years old. His father had built a private range on their property in Montana that extended nearly 2 miles through a valley between 2 ridges. Every weekend, Morrison had practiced shooting at targets placed at various distances. By age 16, he was consistently hitting targets at distances that impressed even professional shooters, but his teammates didn't know this history. All they saw was a young soldier who looked like he should still be in high school. Morrison understood their skepticism. In their world, experience mattered more than natural talent. They had seen too many promising young soldiers fail when the pressure was real. Chen continued studying the target area through his scope. Multiple heat signatures in the compound. Estimate 12 to 15 people total. Hassan is still on the balcony, but he's moving around more now. Morrison tracked the target through his scope, following Hassan's movements with smooth, practiced motions. The terrorist leader seemed agitated about something, pacing back and forth while speaking rapidly to his companions. Morrison had studied hours of surveillance footage showing Hassan's mannerisms and movement patterns. The man always gestured with his left hand while keeping his right hand near his weapon. "Wind is shifting again," Chen reported, "now coming from due east at about 10 knots. Morrison made tiny adjustments to his scope, compensating for the changing conditions. He had learned from his grandfather that patience was the most important quality for a sniper. "Never rush the shot," the old man had told him. "The target will give you the moment when everything is right." The sun was getting lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert landscape. In about 30 minutes, it would be too dark for accurate shooting at this distance. Morrison felt the pressure building, but he refused to let it affect his concentration. "Falcon 1, command. Status report." Chen responded, "Target is still in position. Shooter is ready but waiting for optimal conditions." Captain Rodriguez's voice carried a hint of frustration. "Copy that. But remember, we don't get a second chance at this. Hassan disappears tonight, and we might not find him again for months." Morrison knew the captain was right. This operation had taken weeks to plan and execute. Intelligence assets had risked their lives to provide Hassan's location. Satellite reconnaissance had mapped every building in the compound. Special forces teams were positioned at 3 different locations to prevent Hassan's escape if the shot missed. But Morrison also knew that rushing the shot would guarantee failure. At 3,700 meters, even a tiny mistake would cause the bullet to miss by several feet. He needed perfect conditions and perfect execution. Chen checked his watch. 25 minutes until we lose the light." Morrison continued tracking Hassan through his scope. The terrorist leader had stopped pacing and was now standing still while listening to one of his companions. This was the kind of moment Morrison had been waiting for. Hassan was stationary, presenting a clear profile against the stone wall behind him. Morrison began his final preparations. He checked his breathing pattern, ensuring each breath was controlled and measured. He verified his rifle's position, making sure the bipod legs were firmly planted and the weapon was perfectly stable. He reviewed the ballistic calculations one more time, double-checking every variable that could affect the bullet's flight path. The Barrett M82 was loaded with special match-grade ammunition designed for extreme long-range shots. Each bullet was precisely manufactured to exact specifications, with minimal weight variations and perfect aerodynamic properties. Morrison had personally inspected every round in his magazine, selecting only the most perfect specimens. Chen continued providing updates on wind conditions and target movement. The veteran sniper had initially been skeptical of Morrison's abilities, but he was professional enough to provide the best possible support, regardless of his personal doubts. "Target is stationary now," Chen whispered. "Clear background. No civilians visible in the potential impact area." Morrison felt his heartbeat slow even further as he entered the zone where everything except the target faded away. The desert wind, the voices in his earpiece, even Chen's presence beside him seemed to disappear. His entire world narrowed to the crosshairs in his scope and the distant figure of Ahmed Hassan. Through his scope, Morrison could see Hassan clearly, despite the enormous distance. The high-quality optics made the terrorist leader appear much closer, though Morrison knew the man was actually more than 2 miles away. Hassan was wearing a white robe that contrasted sharply with the dark stone behind him. Morrison's finger moved to the trigger, applying just enough pressure to take up the slack without firing. He had practiced this motion thousands of times until it became completely automatic. His breathing slowed to a barely perceptible rhythm, with each exhale leaving him more relaxed and focused. "Wind holding steady at 8 knots from the east," Chen reported. Morrison made one final scope adjustment, moving the crosshairs slightly to compensate for wind drift. At this distance, an 8-knot crosswind would push the bullet several feet off target if not properly calculated. The moment felt perfect. Hassan was standing completely still, the wind was steady, and Morrison felt the familiar sensation of complete confidence that came when everything aligned correctly. His grandfather had described this feeling as knowing the shot before you take it. Morrison began applying pressure to the trigger with slow, steady motion. The Barrett's trigger was set to break at exactly 2 pounds of pressure, and Morrison could feel when he was approaching that threshold. But just as he was about to fire, Hassan suddenly moved. The terrorist leader turned and walked back into the building, disappearing from view. Chen let out a quiet curse. "Target is no longer visible." Morrison relaxed his trigger finger and continued watching through his scope. Hassan might reappear in a few minutes, or this might be their last chance. The uncertainty was part of the job, but it never made the waiting any easier. "Movement in the compound," Chen observed. "Looks like vehicles are being prepared." Through his scope, Morrison could see several men loading equipment into 2 pickup trucks parked behind the main building. If Hassan was preparing to leave, they might have only minutes left to take the shot. Morrison kept his rifle trained on the balcony where Hassan had been standing, hoping the terrorist leader would make one final appearance. The light was fading quickly now, and soon the shot would become impossible regardless of Hassan's location. "This is it," Morrison thought to himself. "Everything I've trained for comes down to the next few minutes." 15 minutes passed without Hassan reappearing on the balcony. Morrison maintained his position behind the Barrett, muscles relaxed but ready to fire at any moment. The desert temperature was dropping as darkness approached, and he could feel the change affecting his rifle's performance characteristics. Chen continued monitoring the compound through his spotting scope. "Multiple vehicles now. Looks like they're preparing for a convoy departure." Through his earpiece, Morrison heard Captain Rodriguez coordinating with other units positioned around the target area. "Viper team, report your status. If Hassan leaves in those vehicles, you need to be ready for intercept." Viper team's response crackled through the radio. "Viper in position, but the terrain here makes vehicle interdiction extremely difficult. Too many escape routes through the canyon system." Morrison understood the implications. If Hassan left the compound in a vehicle convoy, tracking him through the maze of desert canyons would be nearly impossible. Their intelligence network had taken months to pinpoint Hassan's current location. Losing him now might mean never getting another chance. "There," Chen whispered urgently. Target visible again. Northwest corner of the balcony. Morrison swung his rifle toward the new position. Hassan had emerged from the building and was now standing near the balcony's edge, apparently supervising the vehicle preparations below. The terrorist leader held a cell phone to his ear and appeared to be giving instructions to someone. "Range to new position?" Morrison asked quietly. Chen adjusted his laser rangefinder. 3,703 meters. Wind has picked up to 12 knots, still from the east but with gusts up to 15. Morrison recalculated his hold-off for the increased wind. The stronger gusts were problematic because they could change the bullet's trajectory unpredictably during its 4-second flight time. A gust at the wrong moment could push the shot several feet off target. Falcon 1, this is command. We're monitoring increased radio chatter in the area. Hassan might have detected our presence somehow. Chen and Morrison exchanged glances. If Hassan suspected they were being watched, he would disappear into the compound's interior and not emerge again. The building's thick stone walls would make any shot impossible. Morrison focused intently on Hassan through his scope. The terrorist leader seemed calm and methodical as he spoke on the phone. There were no signs of panic or awareness of danger. Morrison had studied enough surveillance footage to recognize Hassan's behavior patterns, and right now the man appeared to be conducting routine business. "How much time do we have left?" Morrison asked. Chen checked his watch and the light levels. "Maybe 10 minutes of shooting light. After that, thermal scopes only, and thermal won't give you the precision you need at this distance." Morrison knew Chen was right. Thermal imaging was excellent for detecting targets and general aiming, but the precision required for a 3,700-meter shot demanded the clarity that only high-quality optical scopes could provide. Through his earpiece, Morrison heard Sergeant Williams providing updates from his overwatch position. Multiple armed individuals visible around the compound perimeter. Count at least 8 guards, possibly more. They're not showing heightened alert status yet. This was both good and bad news. The guards weren't actively searching for threats, which meant Hassan probably hadn't detected their presence. But 8 guards would respond immediately to any gunshot, and their return fire could make extraction difficult for Morrison's team. Morrison had planned for this scenario during his mission preparation. The team's extraction route led through a series of connected ridges that would provide cover from small arms fire. Chen had positioned their vehicle in a concealed location about half a mile behind their current position. If everything went according to plan, they could be moving toward the extraction point within 60 seconds of taking the shot. "Target is moving again," Chen reported. Morrison tracked Hassan as the terrorist leader walked across the balcony to speak with someone else who had emerged from the building. The new person was shorter and wore military-style clothing rather than traditional robes. Morrison recognized him from intelligence briefings as Hassan's chief lieutenant, a former Iraqi army officer named Mahmoud Qasim. Hassan and Qasim spoke for several minutes, with Hassan pointing toward the vehicles and making gestures that suggested they were discussing departure times and routes. Morrison kept his crosshairs centered on Hassan's chest, ready to fire if the terrorist leader stopped moving long enough. "Wind is gusting more heavily now," Chen observed, "ranging between 10 and 18 knots. The variable wind conditions were making the shot increasingly difficult. Morrison would need to time his shot for a moment when the wind was relatively steady, but predicting those moments was nearly impossible. Desert winds were notoriously unpredictable, especially as temperatures dropped in the evening. Morrison had trained extensively for windy conditions on his family's ranch in Montana. The valley where he practiced shooting was famous for its challenging wind patterns, with gusts that could change direction and intensity without warning. His father had taught him to read wind by watching grass movement, dust patterns, and even the behavior of birds and insects. Here in the desert, Morrison watched small dust clouds being blown across the valley floor. The patterns told him the wind was swirling in complex currents created by the rocky terrain. At ground level, The wind might be blowing from one direction, while at higher altitudes it could be completely different. "How are you calculating wind at the target?" Chen asked, recognizing the complexity of the shot. Morrison had been thinking about this problem since they first established their position. "I'm watching the dust patterns and estimating an average. The bullet will encounter different wind speeds at various altitudes during its flight, so I'm trying to compensate for the overall effect." Chen nodded with grudging respect. Most snipers would have given up on the shot by now, citing impossible conditions. But Morrison's methodical approach to the problem showed a level of sophistication that Chen hadn't expected from such a young soldier. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through their earpieces again. "Falcon 1, we're getting pressure from higher command. Hassan absolutely cannot leave that compound alive." The message was clear. This wasn't just an opportunity to eliminate a high-value target. It was a necessity. Hassan possessed information about planned terrorist attacks that could kill hundreds of civilians if he escaped. Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had trained for moments like this, but the theoretical pressure of sniper school was nothing compared to knowing that real lives depended on his accuracy. "I need to take this shot soon," Morrison said to Chen. "Even if conditions aren't perfect." Chen studied the target through his spotting scope. Hassan was still on the balcony, but now he was moving more frequently as he supervised the loading of equipment into the vehicles below. Each time he stopped, it was only for a few seconds before moving again. "Wait for the right moment," Chen advised. "Hassan will give you a clean shot eventually. He always does." Morrison appreciated Chen's confidence, even though he knew the veteran sniper still had doubts about his abilities. The two men had worked together for only 3 weeks, barely enough time to develop the trust that was essential between a sniper and his spotter. Chen's job was to provide accurate range and wind information, spot bullet impacts, and watch for threats, while Morrison focused entirely on the target. In ideal circumstances, a sniper team worked together for months or even years, developing almost telepathic communication and absolute trust in each other's abilities. Morrison and Chen didn't have that luxury. They had been paired together when Morrison joined the unit, and this was their first major operation together. Chen had initially requested a different partner, preferring to work with more experienced snipers. But Captain Rodriguez had insisted that Morrison needed to be integrated into the team as quickly as possible. "Movement at the compound," Chen reported. "Hassan is walking back toward the building entrance." Morrison followed Hassan through his scope, keeping the crosshairs centered on the terrorist leader's torso. If Hassan disappeared into the building again, they might not get another chance. The vehicles were nearly loaded and departure seemed imminent. But Hassan stopped just before reaching the doorway. He turned around and walked back toward the center of the balcony, apparently wanting to take one final look at the preparations below. This gave Morrison a perfect broadside target at maximum range. "Range check," Morrison requested. Chen adjusted his laser rangefinder. 3,699 meters. Target is stationary." Morrison began his final shooting sequence. He controlled his breathing, slowing his heart rate and entering the focused mental state that was essential for extreme long-range shooting. Everything except Hassan faded from his consciousness. The crosshairs in his scope were perfectly centered on Hassan's chest. Morrison had chosen this aiming point because it provided the largest target area while ensuring an instantly lethal hit. Even if his shot was slightly off due to wind or other factors, a chest hit would still accomplish the mission. Morrison's finger moved to the trigger, taking up the slack with steady pressure. He had practiced this trigger pull thousands of times until it became completely automatic. The Barrett's trigger would break cleanly at exactly 2 pounds of pressure, with no creep or uncertainty. "Wind is steady at 14 knots from the east," Chen whispered, providing final information for the shot. Morrison made a tiny scope adjustment to compensate for the wind. At 3,700 meters, a 14-knot crosswind would drift the bullet approximately 8 feet, if not properly accounted for. Morrison moved his point of aim to the left of Hassan's body, trusting that wind drift would carry the bullet back to the center of the target. Through his scope, Morrison could see Hassan clearly, despite the enormous distance. The terrorist leader appeared calm and confident, probably feeling safe due to the remoteness of his location. Hassan had no idea that a sniper was watching him from over 2 miles away. Morrison continued applying pressure to the trigger, approaching the break point where the rifle would fire. His breathing had slowed to an almost imperceptible rate, with each exhale leaving him more relaxed and focused. Time seemed to stretch out, allowing him to process every detail of the shot setup. But just as Morrison reached the trigger's break point, Chen suddenly grabbed his shoulder. "Wait!" Chen whispered urgently. "Movement on the ridge to our left." Morrison relaxed his trigger finger and shifted his attention to where Chen was pointing. Through his peripheral vision, he could see shapes moving among the rocks about 300 meters away. Someone else was on the ridge with them. Chen studied the movement through his binoculars. 3 individuals armed, moving in our direction. This was a nightmare scenario. If they were enemy forces, Morrison and Chen were in serious trouble. Their hide position was well concealed from the front and sides, but it wouldn't provide protection from attackers approaching from the flank. "Could be our guys," Morrison suggested hopefully. Chen shook his head. "Negative. All our units are accounted for, and nobody was supposed to be in this sector." Morrison faced a terrible choice. He could take the shot at Hassan immediately, but the approaching figures might compromise their extraction. Or he could abandon the shot to deal with the new threat, potentially losing Hassan forever. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Falcon 1, status report. We're showing movement near your position on satellite imagery." Chen responded quietly. 3 unknowns approaching from the west. Request guidance." There was a pause before Rodriguez replied. "Priority remains the primary target. Take the shot if you have it." Morrison looked back through his scope. Hassan was still standing on the balcony, but now he was talking animatedly with his lieutenant. The conversation appeared urgent, and Morrison wondered if Hassan had somehow been warned about the approaching danger. Chen continued monitoring the approaching figures while trying to provide support for Morrison's shot. The veteran sniper was effectively doing 2 jobs simultaneously, a testament to his experience and training. "Range to unknowns?" Morrison asked. 250 meters and closing. They're moving tactically, using cover and concealment." This suggested the approaching figures were trained soldiers rather than local civilians or militia. Trained soldiers would pose a much greater threat to Morrison and Chen's position and extraction. Morrison made his decision. Hassan was the primary target, and completing the mission took priority over personal safety. He returned his full attention to the scope, reacquiring Hassan in his crosshairs. "I'm taking the shot," Morrison announced. Chen nodded grimly. "Wind holding at 15 knots from the east. You're good to go." Morrison began his final trigger sequence again, but this time with the added pressure of knowing they had hostile forces approaching their position. He forced himself to ignore the external threat and focus entirely on Hassan. Through his scope, Hassan appeared larger than life despite the enormous distance. Morrison could see the details of the terrorist leader's face and clothing. Hassan looked confident and relaxed, completely unaware that death was approaching at 2,800 feet per second. Morrison's world narrowed to the crosshairs centered on Hassan's chest. His breathing slowed to barely 1 breath every 10 seconds, each exhale bringing deeper calm despite the approaching threat from their left flank. The Barrett M82 felt like an extension of his body after thousands of hours of practice. "Unknowns now at 200 meters, Chen whispered, dividing his attention between spotting for Morrison and monitoring the approaching figures. They're definitely military trained, moving in tactical formation. Morrison began applying final pressure to the trigger. At this distance, the bullet would take 4.2 seconds to reach Hassan. During those crucial seconds, anything could happen. Hassan might move, the wind might shift, or the approaching soldiers might discover their position. Through his scope, Morrison watched Hassan gesture emphatically while speaking to his lieutenant. The terrorist leader took a step backward, presenting his full profile to Morrison's crosshairs. It was the perfect shot presentation Morrison had been waiting for. "Wind steady at 15 knots. Direction holding," Chen reported, his voice barely audible. Morrison reached the trigger's break point. Every muscle in his body was relaxed except for his trigger finger, which applied precisely 2 pounds of pressure in one smooth motion. The Barrett erupted with its characteristic thunderous boom that echoed across the desert valley. The massive rifle's recoil drove the buttstock back into Morrison's shoulder with tremendous force, but his body absorbed the impact without moving. Through his scope, Morrison watched the bullet's vapor trail streak across the darkening sky like a miniature meteor. Time seemed suspended as the bullet flew its impossibly long trajectory. Morrison kept his scope trained on Hassan, watching for the impact while Chen provided real-time updates on the bullet's flight. "Good shot. Bullet appears on track," Chen called out, following the vapor trail through his spotting scope. The approaching soldiers immediately reacted to the gunshot, dropping into cover positions and scanning for the source of the firing. Morrison ignored them completely, focused entirely on confirming his hit on Hassan. After what felt like an eternity, but was actually only 4.2 seconds, Morrison saw Hassan suddenly jerk backward. The terrorist leader spun around once before collapsing onto the stone balcony. His lieutenant dove for cover behind a concrete wall, shouting orders to unseen guards below. "Target down!" Chen confirmed excitedly. "Clean center mass hit! Hassan is not moving!" Morrison felt a surge of satisfaction, but immediately shifted his attention to their tactical situation. The gunshot had revealed their position to everyone within miles, including the unknown soldiers approaching from their left. "Time to move," Morrison said, beginning to pack his equipment with practiced efficiency. Chen was already dismantling his spotting scope and preparing for immediate extraction. The two snipers had rehearsed this procedure dozens of times until they could complete it in under 90 seconds, even under pressure. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled through their earpieces. "Falcon 1, confirmed target elimination." "Confirmed," Chen responded while continuing to pack gear. "Hassan is down. Definite kill shot. Beginning extraction now." Through the radio, Morrison could hear excitement in the voices of other team members. This had been their primary mission objective for over 2 months. Hassan's elimination would severely disrupt terrorist operations across the entire region. But Morrison had no time to celebrate. The unknown soldiers were now only 150 meters away and moving faster since hearing the gunshot. Morrison shouldered his rifle and prepared to move toward their extraction route. "Movement from the compound," Chen observed, pausing to look through his binoculars. "Guards are responding to Hassan's position, but they seem confused about the direction of the shot." This was exactly what Morrison had hoped for. At nearly 2.5 miles, the sound of his gunshot would reach the compound several seconds after the bullet impact. The guards would hear the sonic boom from multiple directions due to echoes off the rocky terrain, making it difficult to determine the shooter's location. Morrison and Chen began moving toward their vehicle, using a concealed route that followed a ridge line toward their extraction point. They moved quickly but carefully, knowing that a twisted ankle or fall could be fatal with hostile forces in the area. "Falcon 1, this is Overwatch," Sergeant Williams's voice came through their earpieces. "I have eyes on 3 armed individuals approximately 100 meters from your last position. They appear to be searching the area where your muzzle flash originated." Morrison wasn't surprised that the unknown soldiers had identified their firing position so quickly. The Barrett's massive muzzle flash was visible for miles in low-light conditions, and trained observers would have no difficulty determining its source. "Can you identify the unknowns?" Chen asked while jogging toward their vehicle. Williams responded after a brief pause. "Negative identification, but they're carrying AK-47 variants and wearing mixed military gear, possibly local militia or foreign fighters." Morrison and Chen reached their concealed vehicle without further contact. The modified pickup truck had been painted in desert camouflage and equipped with additional armor plating around the engine compartment. Chen took the driver's position while Morrison climbed into the back with his rifle. "Falcon 1 mobile," Chen reported as he started the engine. "Proceeding to Extraction Point Alpha." The vehicle's route took them through a series of connected valleys that provided concealment from observation. Chen drove without headlights, using night vision equipment to navigate the rough terrain. Morrison maintained watch through his rifle scope, scanning for threats along their route. Captain Rodriguez coordinated their extraction over the radio. "All units, Falcon 1 is mobile and proceeding to extraction. Provide overwatch and be prepared to assist if they encounter resistance." Morrison finally allowed himself to think about the shot he had just made. 3,700 meters was an extraordinary distance, even for an experienced sniper. The fact that he had made the shot under less than ideal conditions with approaching threats made it even more remarkable. But Morrison knew this success would only increase the questions about his background and training. His teammates already suspected there was more to his story than a simple farm boy from Montana who had excelled at sniper school. The truth was that Morrison came from a family of legendary marksmen. His great-grandfather had been a sniper in World War II, credited with over 60 confirmed kills in the Pacific Theater. His grandfather had served 3 tours in Vietnam as a Marine sniper, earning the Silver Star and 2 Bronze Stars for valor. Morrison's father had continued the family tradition, serving as a sniper in both Gulf Wars and accumulating one of the highest confirmed kill counts in modern military history. But his father's service was largely classified, and Morrison had been instructed never to discuss the family's military background. The Morrison family owned over 10,000 acres in the Montana mountains, including natural shooting ranges that extended over 3 miles through connecting valleys. Morrison had been shooting at extreme distances since age 10, using rifles that most adults couldn't even lift properly. By age 16, Morrison was regularly making shots at distances that impressed visiting professional shooters and military instructors. His father had brought home special ammunition and equipment from his military deployments, allowing Morrison to train with the same gear used by elite military snipers. But perhaps most importantly, Morrison had inherited a natural ability that couldn't be taught or learned. His vision was better than 2015 in both eyes. His hand-eye coordination was exceptional, and he possessed an intuitive understanding of ballistics that amazed even experienced instructors. Chen navigated their vehicle through increasingly difficult terrain as they approached the extraction point. The rocky ground forced him to drive slowly to avoid damaging the truck's suspension or getting stuck in loose sand. "How did you know you could make that shot?" Chen asked, breaking the silence that had settled over them during the drive. Morrison considered his answer carefully. "I've been shooting since I was very young. My father taught me to trust my training and equipment." Chen nodded, but Morrison could tell the veteran sniper wasn't entirely satisfied with that explanation. A shot at 3,700 meters required more than just training. It required exceptional skill, perfect equipment, and probably a bit of luck. "Your father military?" Chen asked. Morrison nodded. "Marine sniper, 3 tours overseas." This information seemed to satisfy Chen's curiosity for now. Military families often produced exceptional shooters, and Chen had probably seen similar cases during his 8-year career. They reached the extraction point after 20 minutes of careful driving. The location was a flat area surrounded by low hills that provided natural concealment for helicopter operations. Morrison could see the rest of their 12-man team already in position, providing security for the landing zone. Captain Rodriguez approached their vehicle as Morrison and Chen dismounted. "Outstanding work," the captain said, shaking both men's hands. "That shot is going to be talked about for years." Morrison nodded gratefully, but remained focused on the tactical situation. They were still deep in hostile territory, and their extraction helicopter wouldn't arrive for another 30 minutes. Sergeant Williams jogged over to join the conversation. "I saw the whole thing through my scope," he said to Morrison. "That was the most incredible shot I've witnessed in 15 years of military service." The praise felt good, but Morrison was more interested in Williams' tactical assessment. "What about those unknowns who were approaching our position?" Williams shrugged. "They searched the area for about 10 minutes after you left, then disappeared back into the rocks. Probably local militia who heard the gunshot and came to investigate." Morrison felt relieved that the unknown soldiers hadn't pursued them or interfered with their extraction. The mission had been complicated enough without additional combat engagements. Captain Rodriguez gathered the team for a brief debrief while they waited for their helicopter. "Hassan's elimination removes one of the region's most dangerous terrorist leaders," he explained. "Intelligence estimates this will disrupt at least 3 planned attacks and save dozens of civilian lives." Morrison listened to the briefing while continuously scanning the surrounding terrain for threats. Even with the mission complete, they remained vulnerable until safely aboard their extraction aircraft. The sound of approaching rotors finally broke the desert silence. Their extraction helicopter appeared as a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky, flying low to avoid detection by enemy radar systems. Morrison gathered his equipment and prepared to board the aircraft. The Barrett rifle would be cleaned and maintained before their next mission. But Morrison knew it had performed flawlessly when it mattered most. As the helicopter lifted off and began its flight back to base, Morrison reflected on the events of the evening. The shot at Hassan had been technically challenging, but Morrison had known he could make it from the moment he first acquired the target through his scope. Chen leaned over to speak above the helicopter's engine noise. "Command is going to want a full technical debrief on that shot. 3,700 meters is going to generate a lot of interest from the brass." Morrison nodded, understanding the implications. His performance tonight had certainly impressed his teammates, but it would also attract attention from higher-level commanders who might ask uncomfortable questions about his background and training. The helicopter flight took 90 minutes, giving Morrison time to process what had happened and prepare for the inevitable questions. His teammates continued discussing the technical aspects of the shot, analyzing wind conditions and ballistic calculations. Morrison participated in these conversations, but avoided revealing too much about his training methods or family background. The less his teammates knew about his true capabilities, the better for everyone involved. As their base came into view, Morrison saw that word of their successful mission had already spread. Ground personnel were waiting to assist with equipment unloading and debriefing procedures. Morrison climbed down from the helicopter, knowing that his life in the military had changed forever. The rookie sniper, who had been doubted by his teammates, was now the soldier who had made one of the longest confirmed kills in military history. But Morrison also knew that this was just the beginning. His exceptional abilities would lead to more challenging missions and greater responsibilities. The quiet farm boy from Montana had become something else entirely, and there was no going back.